welcome to the CFL Dynasty podcast. It is good to be back after a lengthy 3-week hiatus. I am Steve, your commissioner, back in the host chair for week 12. Holy, we've had a lot of changes over the last 3 weeks. The standings have gotten tighter. The race for the playoffs is well and truly underway with 3 weeks left in the season. We got a lot of recaps to get through. We'll touch on some big trades that happened in the past few weeks, some couple of waiver wire additions as well. We're going to make sure that everyone is well aware of the trade deadline coming up 1 week from today. We're recording on Wednesday. Next Wednesday before week 13 is our trade deadline. And we have another league event coming up on American Thanksgiving. That is also next Thursday, the 28th. Brewhouse location TBD. We're going to be there watching football all day long, regardless of how good on paper the matchups look. It's all about the fun and the engagement. So hopefully we can get everyone at least with a little bit of time down to share in the enjoyment. Last thing I want to say, with the off-season coming ever closer and closer, let's make sure we go in and familiarize ourselves with the rules and the changes that are coming to the league next season and next off-season. There was an email sent out at the beginning of November. Please go check it out from Stu Review. Any questions, bring them to the commish group directly. Thank you very much. Now, I said we got a ton to get into. Let's not waste any time. Let's get into it. Let's look back with our multi-week fantasy review. All right, we're going to jump through weeks 8, 9, 10, and 11. The results of the 3 weeks that we missed, and then last week's barn burners as well. The week 8 matches, we're going to run through them real quickly, but in the American division, this was James getting the win over Hanging with Hernandez, 136-59. We had Italian Stallions begin their chase for first place by taking out the Gronks, 188-155. And BK Whopper lost to Hildy. This was the start of Hildy's turnaround right here. They were 4-4. Hildy comes away with the 120-102 win in week 8 to start his climb up the standings. Over in the Canadian division, the Banditos taking care of White Russian. That was kind of the start of Chris selling off some of his players as well. Working from Mahomes, losing to Ev. Mitch, same kind of scenario there for working from Mahomes. Began moving away some of his players after that 173-144 loss to Ev. And the game of the week back in week 8 was the Captains taking out Nav 146-137. The reverse curse, as this was the last prediction I had made, was that Nav was going to overcome the Captains. Did not happen, and we all know what the standings look like currently anyways. Week 9, much more of the same. We'll stay in the Canadian division to kick it off. And this, I think, really actually was the start of Mitch's sell-off. It was the Captains eking out a 164-162 win on Monday Night Football. We had a couple barn burner games, and the DeAndre Hopkins from Mahomes combination was too much for Mitch to overcome. Moving on to the next ones, this was Ev taking a game in hand over the Banditos, 151-133, and White Russian getting the win over Nav, 117-104. However, short-lived for the White Russians, as this would have been the last victory there currently. On the USA side, we all know Hanging with Hernandez just wins. They got their second of the season against the Gronks, 105-84. Hildy lost to James. That was the little back and forth, 127-108. James creeping up ahead of, but Hanging with Hernandez getting the win still. Italian Stallions taking out BK Whopper, 189-123, and that was good enough to get him in line with the Gronks. leading into week 10. And in week 10, it was the Gronks flipping the script. 169-99. Stu kind of laying the egg there. So the Gronks taking pole position back after week 9 in the USA division. Hanging with Hernandez on a 2-week heater, 107-86 over James. We all saw that coming, I'm sure. And then Hildy, again, getting a couple wins under his belt, 155-95 over BK Whopper. We haven't really talked about it, but Ali Khan and Raheem, as they said in the game recap here, they lost their focus. I think that is so true. They had some injuries early on, but the combination of players is just not getting it done for that lineup. In the Canadian division, back in week 10, this was where Nav maybe turned the season around. 141-109 over the Captains, giving the Captains the second loss on the season. Nav moving up to 500 at that point, but more so getting the points in hand that he needed to not quite cement, but looking good for that wild card spot at the least. Last game in the Canadian divisions were White Russian losing to the Banditos and Ev taking out Working from Mahomes. We talked about both those teams, White Russians and Working from Mahomes, making some trades before that week as well. All that flurry led to week 11, and this was last week. We'll start it right here. It was, again, the game of the week by default, not chosen, but it was the Captains at the Gronks. The Gronks looking to stay in first place, close one game in hand on the Captains, but it went the other way around, 141-133. Again, squeaking out a victory with a Geno Smith last-minute touchdown was the Captains, and good enough to take the 9-point lead over the Gronks, going to 9-2 on the season. And the Gronks moving to 7-4, which has implications. We'll jump back over to the next match in the USA division, but it was Italian Stallions pummeling Ev. Not a good look for the Canadian division, Ev, but 182-86. Ev has 18 tight ends on his roster, and he only started one in Travis Kelce this week, leaving the 40-some points from Taysom Hill on the bench. Oof, it would have been closer, but the solace is that it would not have been enough to take over Stu. And with that triumphant win, Stu moving to 7-4 as well, but the points for advantage, taking first place in the USA division. Gronks falling out again, back in the second overall in the USA division. Finishing up the US games here, cross-divisional week, but let's move over to BK Whopper. They were taking on the Banditos, and another loss for BK Whopper. Tough. Well out of contention for the playoffs now, but at least they still have some decent draft capital to rebuild on. Banditos 145-119. They get the win and looking to move or closer to cementing that second place overall. Could they push for the first spot? This week's fantasy preview is going to play a lot into that, so stay tuned there. White Russian versus James. They both cracked 100 points, but James with the resurgence of Anthony Richardson taking out White Russian. The battle for second and third in that USA division is going to be quite funny. I think second is probably locked up, if we're being honest. But James getting the win here. Hildy taking out, getting his wins the last couple of weeks. He didn't win this week, but he's still in the position there to anchor the third place with James hot on his heels, only a win behind. Let's stay on Hildy for a second here. He lost to Nav 177-164. It was close. He could have used the victory, but Nav getting to 6-5, righting the ship perhaps. Looks like his team's finally firing on all cylinders. Could be trouble, but that rough start of the season might make the gap just too much to close for Nav as he looks to stay in that wild card spot. Last game of the week, we had Working from Mahomes taking out Hanging with Hernandez. Their little mini win streak finally coming to an end. It doesn't do too much as it moves Mitch up to 4-7, 3-8 for Hanging with Hernandez. I think, as we talked about, especially on that Canadian side, Mitch starting to sell off some assets earlier on in the season too. It might be 2025 and beyond for both of these teams. Lengthy recap. But before we get into the past week performers, I want to jump directly over into the standings because we are getting down to crunch time. On the USA side of things, we talked about that tight race. 7-4 Italian Stallions ahead on points 4, almost 100 points ahead of the Gronks now, also at 7-4. So that's going to be an interesting battle as we go towards the end of the season. And we look and see the schedule remaining. Well, unfortunately, they don't play each other, so they're going to have to make ground elsewhere in order to catch Stu and those points 4 that he has in hand. Hildy currently sitting in third place on the USA side at 5-6, but only 1 point less on the points 4. So if James, 4-7, can move in and catch Hildy, he does have the 1 point advantage. Now, BK Whoppers are also at 4-7, but they're a few more points behind. So they're going to have a tough time having to jump both James and then Hildy. Hanging with Hernandez, we know at 3-8. They are looking forward to next season, specifically the 5th round of next season's draft. But it is still up for grabs, that third place side. BK Whopper still in with a slight chance. James a little more in control of his own destiny, even if it is only a very, very minor points differential percentage. But James still getting to play, hanging with Hernandez, then Hildy, and then hanging with Hernandez again. I'm not sure how that schedule worked out in... we're looking at the wrong schedule. That's why it didn't work out that way. Sorry, guys. That was weeks 10, 11, and 12. James's schedule here goes the Gronks, the Captains, and then Hildy. So you could say James may be in tough for these next 2 weeks. I don't know if he'd prefer to move off of it. Hildy has to play Italian Stallions, then the Banditos, and then ends the season, like I said, against James. So that last matchup in rivalry week might not matter, but don't sleep on BK. They get hanging with Hernandez this week. That should be a win, but we're not taking anything for granted in this league. Then they got to play Ev, but finishing off with a game against the Italian Stallions. So the toughest schedule there. I think you got to say that Hildy is going to be the one taking that final spot on the USA division side. Let's run through the potential playoff scenarios on the Canadian division now. It is the Captains sitting in first at 9-2. The playoffs are secured, basically, but first place is not necessarily. Now, 9-2, still leading the division in points 4, but lost the overall points 4 to Stu, who's now 26 points ahead. But the Banditos are only 40 points back of the Captains. 7-4 versus 9-2, but they could close ground this week when they play each other. That would make the gap only 1 game with 2 weeks to go. So not over yet in the Canadian division, but if the Captains do take this win and move to 10-2 on the season, Banditos would be 7-5. That ground might just be too much to catch. Now, third place right now is Ev at 7-4 as well, but he's got a significant ways to make up on the points 4. So the road to first is probably even harder. More likely, Ev's looking at second or third, and Nav sitting at 6-5 almost has that wild card spot locked up, as he's almost 200 points more than the third, fourth, and fifth place team on the USA side. So unless we get a string of sub 100 point games and Nav goes over for the rest of the season, it looks like he is going to be the wild card team. Working for Mahomes, 4-7, White Russian, 3-8. Really just playing it out for next year. The points 4 just not in their favor as well if they were to make any kind of move over the last 3 weeks. So moving back up to that schedule at the top, the Captains, the Banditos, and Ev all in with a slight chance here at first. The game of the week this week is going to be the Captains at the Banditos. There's so much at stake there. Ev taking on White Russian this week, so could potentially be an easier victory for him, but we don't count the easy victories in the CFL Dynasty League. Week 13, when we're back in the cross-divisional games, Banditos taking on Hildy, James gets the captains, and Ev gets BK Whopper, all fairly winnable based on the points spread in those Canadian division teams' favors, and then bringing it home where it could matter again, the Banditos and Ev facing off in the final week of the season. It could be to cement first place, but more than likely that is going to be the deciding game for second in the Canadian division, coming down to the wire, and the captains taking on Working from Mahomes in that final week too. But if we're being honest here, the captains will hope to have first place, at least in the division, wrapped up by then. Whew! After all that, I hope everyone's got a really good understanding of what we are playing for the last few weeks of the season. We're not going to do a week-by-week player recap, but I do want to get into some of the player standings here, specifically our points leaders at the positions as we move in to the playoff crunch time. Okay, so getting into the top performers on the year so far, this is all total points after 11 weeks of the season. At the quarterback position, number one is Lamar Jackson. Tough performance last week, but on the whole, he is the average and the total points leader on the season. Number two is Joe Burrow, followed by Baker Mayfield, Josh Allen, and Jalen Hurts. Then we have Jared Goff, rookie Jaden Daniels, and Bo Nix in the 7 and 8 spot. And then Brock Purdy, Kirk Cousins, and Geno Smith. Kyler Murray rounds out the top 12. So a couple of surprises in there. I think the two rookies being right near the middle of the pack as far as quarterbacks, number one quarterbacks that is got to be the biggest standout. But the surprise of the season might be number 14, and that's Patrick Mahomes sitting behind Sam Darnold, actually. So there's a little bit of disappointment. I mean, he's not a number one quarterback, but the top 12 quarterbacks, they start off pretty solid. Lamar, Burrow, Baker squeezing in there, and then Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts. But then a bit of a surprise on the remainder of the top 12 quarterbacks this season. The running back position, again, it's some big names at the top. Derrick Henry leading with 221 points. Saquon, 208. Those are the two that are over 200. Kamara, Bijan, Joe Mixon, Jahmyr Gibbs rounding out the first six there, and then Breece Hall. Felt like maybe a little bit of a disappointing season for Breece, but I mean, number 7 on the year, he is still an RB1 without a doubt. Kyron Williams, James Cook, and then David Montgomery, Chuba Hubbard, and Devon Achane rounding out the 12 there. Notables, Chase Brown coming in at 15 overall, and we got a couple, Ramondre, Tony Pollard, and then Jonathan Taylor, 21, 22, and 23. So you can see some of the names starting to fall down a little bit, but the top running backs are all pretty guaranteed to be there on a weekly basis. Wide receivers, top 12 through the first 3 quarters of the season. Jamar Chase, number 1 by a mile. It's not even close, 215. Number 2 on the year is Amon-Ra St. Brown now. Chase does have his bye week this week, so there'll be a little bit of catching up, but for the most part, I mean, that gap is huge. We're talking 55 points. After Amon-Ra, it's Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, see if he can keep at the number 4 spot with Cooper Rush at quarterback. Drake London, Garrett Wilson, same thing. Aaron Rodgers not looking great. He might not stick around the top 12 for much longer. Terry McLaurin, Zay Flowers, Darnell Mooney, Jaden Reed, Brian Thomas Jr., the lone rookie in the top 12 there, and then Jackson Smith-Njigba with 118 points. That's maybe a surprise. A couple of big games, but could be turning into a pretty consistent player, number 12, through the first 11 weeks. And why don't we look at the tight ends next, because this is, well, it feels like maybe a surprise, but Hildy's probably going to say it was not. 159 points on the season. That is Brock Bowers. George Kittle having a monster game. I think he's back, so he might be able to catch Bowers on the season. He's only, 18 points behind. Kelsey has climbed back into the conversation of top tight ends. He's in third. Cade Otton, the surprise. Great trade in the offseason, whatever team traded for Cade Otton, the number 4 tight end on the season. Trey McBride, Kyle Pitts, Jonnu Smith at number 7. Hunter Henry, Mark Andrews, Zach Ertz get in at the 10 spot. Tucker Kraft, and then Taysom Hill may not be the number 12 tight end for much longer if the Saints continue to use him like he has been used the last week. But off this week, so Ev's going to have to find an alternative option. He's got about 9 other tight ends on the year. I won't go through kickers. Let's just assume that the boss, Chris Boswell, is the number 1 kicker on the season and everybody else is behind him. We'll move out of the stats and the standings now, and we have to get over to the commish prediction recap section. There's nothing to report. I'm not going to go through the last 3 weeks and pretend I had the picks ready, etc., etc. But I do have some good picks coming up this week, and we'll go through that in the fantasy preview. But we have some pool updates, and then we got to give Stu some props because he's still been sending in his commish locks the last few weeks, and he's actually been doing pretty good on them. So we'll go through what he has for this week, and hopefully the luck doesn't turn because we got the podcast back up and running. But as far as the pool recaps, again, we were close to the bad beat last week. Hildy was hanging on until the final game. It is now beyond 250. We're up to 264 for week 12. $264 is the bad beat, and we'll see if anybody can claim the league fees, as somebody put it there, going out of this week. The picks of the Bozo pool. We got to pause and talk about this here. So there's going to be a ban on a certain someone in the league picking games involving their favorite team, whether it's money line, spread, it doesn't really matter. But I think let's just try and go without our hearts for these bozos. You guys, we got to get back on track, but get onto the website. There are some good games, I think, to be picked this week. So let's get those bozos, get back on the winning streak. No picking with your heart. Wink, wink. You know who you are. And let's get into what Stu has for us here on the commish locks. All right, these are hot off the press, coming from Stu Mish. The money line of the week. The Eagles, minus 155. That should be a pretty good lock, but Eagles, minus 155 is your money line of the week. The spread of the week, this is the Vikings, minus 3.5 against the Bears. If you're not the person we talked about in the last segment, you are free to bet on this game. I don't mind it taking the Vikings minus 3.5, even as a Bears fan. You just have to look at it objectively. The upset of the week. The 49ers are plus 110. And I don't know how you maybe move away from that unless Purdy's status changes. Who knows what that might look like. But the upset of the week, the 49ers plus 110. And then we have the Ravens Chargers over 51 for our prop of the week. And our long shot is a Tyreek Hill anytime touchdown. He's plus 110, or the first TD for plus 650 here on Cheetah, scoring the first one. We'll see how Stu does this week, and good luck to everybody that plays along. All right, well, thank you for getting those back in on time, Stu. I appreciate it. But now let's get to the meat of the episode. This is what we're here. These are going to be the deciding games. It's week 12. There's some buys. Let's get into the fantasy preview. Well, I teased it earlier, but the game of the week, this one has implications for the Canadian division all over it. It's the captains at the Banditos. As of now, we have a 140 to 139 slight edge for the captains. 1 point on either side. I mean, that can swing in an instant. So we'll see what we have in store this week. But the big but guns in this one are Baker Mayfield and Bo Nix. You heard two of the top 12 quarterbacks in the standings. They're going off against Jared Goff and Brock Purdy. And there might be some points from the running back position to Chuba Hubbard, although we do have Carolina activating the rookie Brooks this week. We'll see if he can maintain his workload. Brian Robinson and DeAndre Swift going for the captains. James Conner, who has been pretty consistent this year as well, and Bucky Irving going for the Banditos. At wide receiver, it's Nico Collins versus Justin Jefferson. We'll see how these two studs match up. The captains finishes with Devontae Smith, Cade Otton, and then Chris Boswell kicking the balls. Banditos rounds out their lineup. CeeDee Lamb, Terry McLaurin. Hopefully he doesn't bounce back. Well, hopefully for the captain's sake anyways. Cole Kmet and Cairo Santos. This is the captains 9-2 fending off the 7-4 Banditos. If the Banditos can pull out the upset, they're going to be within striking distance of the captains with 2 games remaining. We'll see how this one plays out. Let's finish the Canadian division with another game that could, again, potentially affect that wild card race, but it's Nav at working from Mahomes. We know the points for are extremely high in Nav's favor, but Mitch could get back in to the mix with a win here, 4-7, taking on 6-5. That's Nav. And Mitch looking again to pull within a game of striking distance, but the big points for is going to be tougher to overcome. Quarterbacks in this one, Nav rolling out Jalen Hurts and CJ Stroud up against Sam Darnold and QB 14, Patrick Mahomes. Jahmyr Gibbs, Josh Jacobs, and CMC are running for Nav. Mitch countering with Gus Edwards, Justice Hill, and Ken Walker. Remember the Josh Jacobs and J.K. Dobbins trade going from working from Mahomes over to Nav. Only Jacobs getting to play against his former team in this one. A.J. Brown, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Amon-Ra St. Brown are Nav's wide receivers. Are going up against Tank Dell, Josh Downs, and Jameson the Gambler Williams. Njoku versus Andrews, and Austin Seibert up against Jake Bates. So Mitch hoping for some points out of that Detroit lineup from anyone not named St. Brown in this matchup. Projection is Nav 155 to 118. If you're following along at home, we are picking Nav as the pick in this one. And in case I don't think I mentioned it, but that game of the week, we're going with the captains in that one too. Finishing the Canadian division, Ev and White Russians. White Russians looking forward to 2027, just kind of playing out the strings in this one. We're running out Mason Rudolph at quarterback in this one. The streets are lean on the White Russian side of things here. He does have Najee and Javonte Williams. See how Najee does tomorrow night. Keenan Allen, T. Higgins, who apparently is not injured and good again. Again, you never know. Lab McConkey, DK Metcalf going for White Russian, and he's got Gesicki and Goddard, double tight end stack. Justin Tucker, hopefully he doesn't miss any more kicks this year, although it doesn't matter really. Ev got the rookie sensation, Jaden Daniels, and Mr. Unlimited, Russell Wilson. Rico Dowdle getting more involved, but Dallas, tough schedule. We'll see how he handles it. David Montgomery and Tony Pollard. And then I've got Jacoby Myers and Jalen Waddle. Double tight end stack of Kelsey and Kittle. We'll see if, without Taysom Hill, he'll perform decently this week. Jason Sanders at kicker. So, couple of one-sided affairs. We're taking Evan this one. It's projected 140 to 69. We got to like the big point spread in that. Nav heavily favored as well, but the game of the week in the Canadian division with those big implications, the captains at the Banditos. On the USA side, James taking on the Gronks. I mean, we could have some drama either way. James looking to maybe claw back in to that third place spot in the US side, or is he trying to go for the lower pick and just boost up those numbers for a better shot at the toilet bowl? We'll see. Hopefully he doesn't score too many points though with Anthony Richardson back in as a starting lineup. I think there's going to be some lineup changes here with a few buys in play in James' lineup at the time of recording. But he's got Mike Evans coming back. That's the big news. Cooper Kupp, Jerry Jeudy are the wide receivers here. Looks like maybe Calvin Austin the third making a debut, and Christian Watson. So the heavy wide receiver stack here for James. He's got 5 in the lineup. Tucker Kraft at the tight end position. Gronks, again, they got Stu, not lapping them, but overtaking them. They can get back in the win column here probably pretty easily. Lamar and Kyler, Derrick Henry, Jonathan Taylor, Tyreek, Puka, Cortland Sutton. It should be some points scored there. They're going 2 tight ends looking like as well with Freiermuth and Schultz, and Will Lutz putting them in for Denver. So it's 141-79, the spread in favor of the Gronks. We're going to take the Gronks, and I think James's playoff bid might come up just a bit short, unfortunately. But tough situation with all the injuries affecting his team there too. We can go to the next game, and I mean, again, this could have all sorts of playoff ramifications. If Hildy can somehow mount a big game against Stu and peg him back, well, the Gronks could take over first, and Hildy could cement that third spot. Stu sitting at 7-4, leading the division. He's got Stafford and Tua going as QB this week, HN, Barkley, and Mixon, and Ramondre Stevenson as well. So heavily favored on the running back side. That's countered by Hildy throwing out Herbert and Levis at QB. I mean, Herbert could be carrying this team right into the playoffs. Kareem Hunt with Pacheco coming back. We'll see how he plays out. Tyrone Tracy, again, quarterback changes maybe coming in New York. Could affect the running back position there. Jawan Jennings, like this is the waiver wire pickup of the year, Hildy's wide receiver, and Quentin Johnson resurgence time. He's got Calvin Ridley stacked with Levis. That's hit or miss sometimes. Brock Bowers and Will Disley, a lot of double tight ends this week. The tight ends are actually getting some points this year. Number 1 tight end rookie Brock Bowers, by the way, and Joey Sly. The last couple of positions on Stu's team, he's got Neighbors and Smith in Jigba going at wide receiver, Trey McBride, and then Jake Elliott kicking the balls. And then we get to the last game on the slate here, and there really isn't much going on. Maybe BK is still in the playoff picture at 4-7. Hanging with Hernandez at 3-8, and with Davis Mills starting at QB, I think we know which direction they are going. On the BK side, Jordan Love, Drake May, I mean, there's points to be had there. Aaron Jones, Kyron Williams, and then Jordan Addison, George Pickens, Jaden Reed, and Xavier Worthy. Jake Ferguson, I think maybe injured this week. We'll have to monitor that. And Daniel Carlson. So 126-50 are the point spread here. Hanging with Hernandez, notable. They have Sam Laporta, who I think is healthy again, back in the lineup. And sensational tight end, Jonnu Smith. But take BK. They're going to get the win. They're going to go to 5-7, barring a miracle again. I really don't see 0-2 against hanging with Hernandez, but stranger things have happened. So we're taking the favorites in all of the American Division games. You got Gronks and Stu both coming away with victories, it's looking like. And BK getting the win there too. It's just going to kind of muddy the waters for that third place spot, which means that points 4 might again come into play between Hildy and BK, and we'll see if James gets another win here too. He could be in with a shout, but he'd probably prefer to go the other way. So hopefully the American Division gets shaken up a little bit, but it doesn't look like the upsets are going to be coming this week. That's it for the previews. That's it for the pod. Thank you for listening. I hope it's been welcome to have the pod back in your ears this week, and we'll try and do it again for the rest of the time here, going towards our final big playoff podcast that we have planned at the end of the season. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the games this week. As always, be fun, be engaged. Kamish out.